So let's talk about Games Workshop's Metawatch, discussing the changes to the balanced data slate, and a few tantalising hints of what's going to be coming next time. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today I thought I'd make a quick video covering Games Workshop's latest Metawatch article, their semi-regular check-in to talk about Warhammer 40k game balance, giving us a few thoughts as to their thinking of how they've rebalanced the game, and usually sprinkling in a few soft clues as to what they might do next, and which army list might potentially be on their radar for changes for either buffs or nerfs. For this one, I was perhaps slightly surprised that they did another 40k Metawatch quite so soon after the balanced data slate. It's only been about 3 weeks since their last one, so not really much time for any tournament data or anything like that, and perhaps as such the video was a kind of short one, and the article even more so. I guess perhaps there's maybe not too much intelligent to say so close to a rules change, other than just take a look at a few initial things, maybe look if any armies have any massively obvious glaring problems, but still accept that there's probably a bit more data needed before people can really decide whether something's gone badly or not. Often with these updates, they'll often show off a graph of 40k army win rates and then talk a little bit about event wins and things like that. Looks like they opted not to do that this time, and to be fair to them, I don't think it's the most unreasonable decision in the world. There's some armies that just really don't have enough data to put meaningfully on those numbers yet, and particularly for armies with lower play rates, it might need a lot of caveating to say that there's going to be a reasonable amount of the data that's just down to random chance, and it's not really worth taking too seriously just yet. I did talk through some initial 40k win rates on the channel the previous day if you want to take a look. I'll link that down in the video description. My guess is that whenever they drop the next one, maybe in another 3 or 4 weeks' time, we'll probably get a fun graph to take a look at there, and have a look at what Games Workshop's perspective on the Warhammer meta is. Also, one thing that I was kind of curious as to 40k updates was when the Dark Angels points might go live. We're expecting a digital download for them sometime between now and when the codex drops. I feel like there's a reasonable chance it could be next Thursday. It's sometimes just a few days before the book goes on official full sale, even if it's been out and about in the Deathwing Assault box for a while. In any case though, it seems that wasn't mentioned here. For actual content of their video and article, it basically boiled down to we've made these changes and spent a bit of time talking about things like Phantasm changes, or the new Drukhari detachment or Custodes changes, which are things that have already happened pretty much, and then a little bit as to a few trends in army performance since the update in very early data, and then at the end dropped a couple of hints as to some of the armies that could expect changes. For the discussions of how things have changed since the points and rules updates, they did mention specifically that they feel that 40k game balance really isn't in the worst place in the world, and I would certainly agree with them there with the broad strokes. Compared with the crazy things that we saw at 10th edition's launch, or for the majority of 9th edition before they got their acts together, there's definitely more scope for the vast majority of armies competing against the vast majority of others. Always criticisms and things that could be improved. Some things are strongest, some things are unfortunately weakest, and plenty of factions don't really play in the way that people would want them to. But on the whole, they're definitely doing way better than Games Workshop have often done in the past. For specific things that are brought up, they did point out that both Astra Militarum and World Eaters have both won individual big events. They didn't really mention that their average tournament performance and win rates does seem to be right at the bottom of 40k, both getting win rates of around about 40 to 45% depending on data source. I feel like World Eaters players in particular weren't happy with their updates, going from being at least a fairly well balanced army to solidly towards the bottom of the pile. For talking about things at the top of the meta, they mentioned that Eldari and Chaos Marines are much more within their 45 to 55% win rates. Again, that's true, they tended to be massively overrepresented in tournament wins before, and that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Again, maybe slightly neglecting to say that Chaos Space Marines are again right at the bottom of 40k again. Despite winning one big event, the Chaos Space Marines have average win rates of around about 43 to 45% depending on source, and that could certainly put them in the sort of realm where they could expect some sort of positive balance update. I did notice that they said that Eldari and Chaos were winning events, and follow that up with Eldari still doing well, kind of implying that they can see that Chaos Space Marines just have had a lot of the punch taken out of them by their own numbers. Otherwise, they called attention to the fact that Drukhari and Custodes are both doing way better, certainly good news for them as they were two of the weakest armies in 40k beforehand. That definitely seems to be the case. Drukhari seem to be in a pretty great spot with a balanced win percentage and capable of punching up to win events. The Sky Splinter's done great for them, and Custodes with the points cost and rules change actually look like they might be in the place where they could be borderline too strong again, win rates around about 55. though I wouldn't say it's to the point where they're overly oppressive, as they could be for a lot of armies at the very start of 10th edition. Just in general, they were keen to point out that a much wider array of armies are winning or placing highly at events, which does seem to be the case so far. Again, for all the criticisms of 40k game balance, it definitely could be worse if you would go back to most of Warhammer 40k's history. I maybe wouldn't be too surprised if we start to see a few armies starting to be a bit more dominant on the top tables, though. I feel like you often have a period of experimentation after a big balance change like this before people get used to the new best thing. I feel like when things settle down, we might well be seeing quite a lot of Custodians and Necrons winning or placing at events, though I guess we'll see. Then, otherwise, towards the end of their interview, they did give us a couple of hints as to potential rules changes. I kind of feel like the whole point of this update might have been just slightly to communicate a couple of sentiments around Admech and Necrons. When the balanced data slate dropped, I feel like people were both just particularly displeased that neither of those factions got any changes, and as expected at the time, they did just confirm that the reason for that was because there was a fairly short period between their codex releasing and the balanced data slate coming out. Though, as I said at the time, I did feel like maybe that's a little bit on the weak side. There were 7 full weeks between the full release of Codex Admech and Codex Necrons and the Dataslate coming out. I know that period did encompass Christmas time, when I'm sure people were working a lot less and there was far less tournament data coming in. But even with that going on, I feel like they could have made some small tweaks to the factions, even if they didn't go whole hog and do something radical with them. Admit that I feel like Admech might need a bit more of a nuanced solution to get them in a place where people are happy to play them. The Necrons, it just feels kind of obvious that the absolute first thing that they should probably do is increase the cost of Catan if they want to keep them with their current abilities. They're just a very easy and obvious reason why Necrons are one of the most dominant factions right now, and they do suppress other choices within the Codex a bit. As for quite a lot of centerpiece damage dealer units, you'd really have to justify taking them over picking something like a Nightbringer or a Void Dragon and the immense value that they have. For actual specific comments they made, they said that Necrons are a bit high on the win percentages and they're likely to have some adjustments to bring them down slightly. Not really any sort of surprise there. Basically everyone was expecting them to be strong, and the data does seem to bear that out. For Admech, they made the statement that their win percentages are actually doing okay at events and things, but some of the units aren't fulfilling their intended roles on the tabletop. I guess that's one way to put it, really. For their strongest list these days, they often tend to be relying on spamming some fairly cheap units with invulnerable saves and good defensive profiles and just moving them all over the board, shutting down your opponents in terms of movement and trying to outscore the enemy, and it just feels like a bit of a weird and slightly depressing way to play 40k. Plus, the price of entry to actually get those sort of lists on the table is utterly ridiculous. You could be running meme lists like, say, 18 Iron Strider engines of one sort or another, and that being genuinely one of the better ways to play Admech right now, and no normal player is going to go out and buy that many things, as the cost will be astronomical, and it's not exactly the army that most people have in mind when they want to collect an Admech faction. I feel like most people's hope is that they do something a bit more radical with Adeptus Mechanicus, change up their core rules or stat lines and make the individual units actually scary again, and not just relying on things like Iron Strider spam or Castphon Breachers for their only good damage, and just general not needing quite so many models to put on the table to make the faction work. Good to know that they do have Admech in their crosshairs though. I'm sure that will help out some people, though I guess we can't expect any sort of new update for them until the next data slate in another few months' time, not unless they do pull something surprising out of the bag. Otherwise, they didn't actually mention any buffs to struggling armies so far. I guess it is still early days. I suppose by initial win percentages, Space Marines and the World Eaters seem to be doing worse than most, and armies like Chaos Marines, Blood Angels, and Astra Militarum all seem to be on the lower side of win percentages, even if all of those seem to be good enough to still put in a tournament win or so in the hands of great players with them. It wasn't mentioned at all in the article or the video, but I do kind of wonder if they might go through a system of handing out an early detachment to the army that's struggling most. Drukhari got that last time round. If current trends continue, I wonder if World Eaters might have a chance for that when they get looked at. I could certainly imagine that as a kind of feels-good reward for armies that have just suffered through a period of being very weak in game. In any case though, an interesting little update from them. In any case, good to know what they're thinking and roughly what to look out for in the future, even if the early hints at the moment were kind of vague and they didn't have as much to say if it was just after a data slate. Let me know your thoughts on the video down in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to keep up with Games Workshop's news and releases about the competitive game. I do tend to post 40k videos just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.